What did we learn from Baltimore Ravens 2024 mandatory minicamp? We talk about that and so much more coming up next on this bonus edition of Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Ostreicher of Ravens Wire. We're here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much, as always, for being here and making Locked On Ravens your first listen each and every day and a part of your day in general. We're free and available on all podcasting platforms. That includes in video form on YouTube, where you can like the video, subscribe to the channel. Also in audio form, you can follow along, subscribe over there as well. We bring you 5 days a week, plus more like these bonus episodes, Ravens content daily. So even in the lull period of the offseason, we're now getting into that with minicamp being over. We'll still have you covered 5 days a week on this show. So be sure to tell a friend, tell a family member. We have them covered with their daily Ravens content. Now, I wanted to do a couple of bonus episodes. I think I am going to do one tomorrow as well on what Steve Young had to say about Lamar Jackson. Minicamp is a big deal, though, so of course we spent the week talking about updates from all 3 days, but now I want to kind of bring it all together and talk about what we learned, takeaways, observations, and of course, we'll talk about both the offensive and defensive sides of the ball, who stood out, and we'll do again on Monday more of a studs and duds or rises and fallers, because people love that one for the OTAs, so look, we'll do it again for minicamp up on Monday, so be sure to stay tuned for that one. But I just want to talk about general takeaways, observations, and what we learned here. So offense in the first segment, defense in the second segment, and then we'll just kind of put a neat little bow on it, wrap it up for the final part of the show, and then we'll continue our conversation on Monday about risers and fallers, and a special bonus episode tomorrow, again, about Steve Young and his excellent conversation and points about Lamar Jackson. But let's talk about what we learned here from minicamp. First of all, we learned that Baltimore has no crazy contract disputes, no crazy stuff we didn't know about coming into this, right? I think we all figured, no Lamar Jackson contract saga. J.K. Dobbins had his hold in throughout, workouts and training camp last year. There was none of that this year. Deontay Hardy had an excused absence due to his baby being in the hospital. So again, shout out and prayers to Deontay Hardy. Want to make that clear, and to his family and everybody. But I'm glad that the Ravens don't have any of that, because look, teams talk about how they're not distractions, this, that, and the other, but depending on the gravity of it, and look, Lamar Jackson certainly carried a lot of weight in terms of his situation in general. That was a huge burden for a lot of people. So teams can say it's not a distraction, and to an extent you can make it not one, but it'll always pop up here and there. So I'm glad they didn't have to do any of that. Speaking of Lamar Jackson, seemed like his performance continued to increase as minicamp went on. You had day one, the offense certainly struggling, Lamar throwing some interceptions, but then, as we've talked about, the offense recovered on day two and also on day three, even though that was more of a laid-back, chill practice. Wasn't a ton. There were no helmets and everybody was just kind of having fun. Lamar was making some throws. He had one to Tez Walker, who we'll talk about in a couple of minutes. He's been an absolute stud. And then Tylan Wallace made some plays, Malik Cunningham. All these guys, and we're talking about them on Monday too. One of the big positional battles that I had highlighted coming into minicamp was that, not the top of the wide receiver depth chart competition, but you start to go down a little bit on the depth chart in that sixth wide receiver spot. Tylan Wallace is the guy right now there, but Malik Cunningham is going to want some snaps there, right? He's going to want to compete for that job. You got a couple of other players like Isaiah Washington, an undrafted player, Dayton Wade, even Kadir Ismail, who they use a little bit at tight end, who is obviously the son of former Baltimore Ravens wide receiver and a weekly guest here on Locked On Ravens, Kadri Ismail. So we've talked about Kadir quite a bit on this show. But it seems like what we learned, especially from what we heard at the podium, is that with Todd Monken in this offense, they are going to try to hopefully be more balanced this season. And, that's from what a lot of different players said at the podium. And what can you take away from minicamp, right? We've had this conversation before. We've had it a lot actually here. With minicamp, it's hard because there are no pads. You do have those chill laid back practices. Like, I'm not putting too much stock into everything that happened at minicamp here. I'm not saying that, oh, Lamar Jackson hit these throws, he's winning his third MVP, or this guy struggled, so he's off the team, or he's terrible. That's not what we're doing here. The real ability for these guys to learn and for everybody to kind of get real takeaways is the padded practices. We're not close to that yet. We haven't had any of that yet. OTAs, minicamp, it hasn't been a thing. So you can obviously take away from reps, take away from guys making good throws, making good catches, making good defensive plays. But it is just a different animal when the pads come on. But I don't want to necessarily say you can't take anything away from these practices. It's just you can't take a ton away from these practices. Now, Derrick Henry went up at the podium and talked about how it's a new challenge for him learning this offensive system. And, he's been a sponge and learning it really well. But what I learned is, look, Derrick Henry already loves it in Baltimore, which that story, that arc has happened for a lot of veteran players. It's not just a Derrick Henry thing, but that's the first step, right? Being acclimated, getting acclimated. You've got to feel comfortable in your new spot. Derrick Henry spent 8 years in Tennessee. It's really all he knew. In fact, it is all he knew as an NFL player. So for him to say that, he's had a lot of fun, getting to know the guys, getting to know his teammates. But the way that this offense works and is going to work this season, I know we all talk about the Ravens offense being more balanced, or at least us wanting to see it be more balanced. I've been a big vocal proponent of that. But look, they were the top rushing team in the league last year in terms of rushing attempts. They just signed Derrick Henry, who you want to go look at his rushing attempts, 300 plus, 270 plus. Like, look, Derrick Henry runs the ball a lot. When you sign Derrick Henry, you're not saying we're going away from the run. Baltimore shouldn't go away from the run. I mean, we talked about that. I mean, if you want to go to the AFC Championship game, fine. Like, I'm not going to have that conversation right now because we've talked about it for so long. But they should not abandon their identity, and they aren't, because signing Derrick Henry is a clear sign. You can be balanced or more balanced than you were last season while also not abandoning your identity as a run-first team. Baltimore is a run-first team. They have been a run-first team. They should continue to be a run-first team, and part of that is on the offensive line, where the Ravens used a bunch of different offensive line combinations. And this is, look, John Harbaugh said that he would love to have guys set by before the preseason and maybe have a couple of more spots to look at. But in reality, these guys are going to be competing probably for most, if not all, the preseason. So I'm not holding my breath in terms of guys winning a spot during the early portion of training camp like that. It's not going to affect anything, in my opinion. Now, in terms of Patrick Ricard and his role, John Harbaugh, speaking about the offense, John Harbaugh talked a lot about what his role is going to be. He said he's a good football player. And look, I think last year, I mentioned this on yesterday's show too, we had a lot of conversations about what Patrick Ricard's role is going to be last year under Todd Monken. Is he going to be potential surprise cut candidate? Are they going to just completely diminish his role and he'll be a non-factor in the offense? Well, he played a very big role for this team last season and was still a big part of what they did, obviously. So that to me is really important. But overall, and I think Ryan Mink put this really well on BaltimoreRavens.com, so be sure to check out Ryan's article. But he said Lamar Jackson and the offense are sharpening their pre-snap weapons. There was a lot of miscommunication on that first day, a lot of false starts, a lot of pre-snap penalties. Guys would have to run laps, and that's part of this. I mean, it's year two. It's on Monken's offense, part of trying to get some of these guys up to speed, especially on the offensive line when you have three new starters or you have three competitions going on. It's a lot. So just getting back in the groove, have those mistakes happen now, have those interceptions happen now. Right? Zay Flowers struggled with some ball security on that first day, I believe, as well, or maybe it was the second day. I can't remember which one. But then he recovered and made a couple of really nice catches. So it's all just the process, right? The offseason and these workouts and getting ready for the season, it's about identifying weaknesses, strengthening strengths, and getting all of the wrinkles out before the games count and before the games matter. And you can talk about how important training camp and preseason is, which is it's true, right? All that's important, but it does start during minicamp and OTAs, where that's kind of like the smaller foundation building block. And to me, that's really important. Now, what I also learned from minicamp here, at least this is one of my takeaways, is that Baltimore's going to have to find time for all three of these tight ends, Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely, obviously, but do not sleep on Charlie Kolar. Speaking of Qadri Ismail, that is one of Q's best friends. He also now loves Tavius Robinson, but Q's been on the Charlie Kolar train for a while now. Hasn't had as big of a role, obviously, as Andrews and Likely being that third tight end, but he has impressed a ton during minicamp, during workouts. And we talk so much about how the Ravens have to use Isaiah Likely. Well, I think that the Ravens should go back to using 3 tight end sets a bit more too. And you can work play action off of that, especially with Derrick Henry in that backfield. That to me is so dangerous. So still plenty of things to talk about here on Locked On Ravens. Coming up, we'll be talking about some defensive takeaways, players who stepped up, and a lot more states and plenty to talk about on the show. First, this show is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors is everything you need to maintain a vehicle and level up peak performance, superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has it covered. With over 120 million parts, the number one ride or die always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because at eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. All the parts you need, the prices you want. It's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. We're back for our second segment, Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still talking with you here on this Saturday. We got a bonus episode here for you. Really appreciate everybody taking some time out of your weekend and making Locked On Ravens a part of your day. Be sure to also make Locked On Sports Today with Peter Bukowski a part of your day right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day as well. Peter brings you the general sports news and analysis, the biggest storylines about all of sports each and every single day, Monday through Friday. So be sure to check him out here on our network. Now, let's talk about defense. We talked about offense a little bit. This defense, look, what I learned, this defense is still really good. Really good. Part of that being, and Ryan, again, I like the way Ryan put this on BaltimoreRavens.com, Baltimore's defense is going to be aggressive. And we saw Mike McDonald in that San Francisco game last season. Remember when the sideline cam captured him all fired up and high-fiving guys and going crazy on the sideline? Well, imagine that. Turn it up 10 levels and have it happen all the time. That is Zach Gore. Zach Gore is passionate. Zach Gore is fiery. Zach Gore embodies what this defense already had in him, and I think he turns that heat level up a lot. And so when you have guys like Roquan Smith, who are fiery leaders, right? You have Kyle Hamilton and Marcus Williams, some of these other guys who are more, soft-spoken, but still very good leaders. Those are guys who still have that leadership quality in them. And obviously you talk about others, Marlon Humphrey, and I could go on and on and on there, but it seems like Baltimore's defense is really going to embody what Zach Gore brings to the table. Zach Gore is a first-time defensive coordinator. Multiple players, Kyle Van Noy, Kyle Hamilton, a bunch of guys went up on that podium. And whether it was, OTAs, we can even go back there as well if you want to talk about what guys said about Zach Gore during OTAs. These guys all believe in what Zach Gore brings. And look, this is not like Zach Gore is a first-time coach. Yes, he's a first-time coordinator. I expect there to be some ups and downs and learning curve with that. But he was an NFL player for 3 years with the Ravens. He's somebody that was an all-pro at the NFL level and has been in the coaching scene for a while now. And look, my whole thing is, if you want to be the defensive coordinator of the Baltimore Ravens, just be the Ravens inside linebackers coach, right? Go back. Dean Pease, Don Martindale, Mike McDonald, now Zach Gore. 4 straight guys, and it's crazy to think about. And I think Rex Ryan too, right? Wasn't Rex Ryan the inside linebackers coach? I think he was. Maybe I'm mistaken. But again, inside linebacker coach for the Ravens. If you want that Ravens defensive coordinator job, here's a quick tip. All you have to do is be the Ravens inside linebackers coach. No, it was all right. Rex Ryan was defensive line. Want to look it up. He was their defensive line coach from 1999 to 2004. So the Ravens love to hire internally for the most part for their defensive coordinator job. Technically, if you want to get really technical, Mike McDonald was an outside hire, but again, he was with the Ravens for all but one of those years. So I'm technically counting him as an internal hire, even though I guess he was really an external guy. But to me, I think, again, embodying Zach Gore's personality here, how aggressive he is, and just a guy that has all that passion will benefit Baltimore's defense a lot when it comes to getting off to the right start, I'd say. I think that you can't afford to start slow if you're Zach Gore. And so Ryan's saying that the Ravens blitzed 22% of the time last season, 5th lowest percentage in the league, still led the league with 60 sacks. I think that number will probably go up next season. I don't think it's going to be Don Martindale level of blitz happy. I think, that is hard to replicate. And I think we're going to see plenty of that with Don Martindale over Michigan now. But Kyle Van Noy saying he was an aggressive player. So I think that's what you're going to want to see him be as a coordinator, is be aggressive, but he's also really smart, very, very smart. So I'm excited. I'm excited to see what Zach Gore brings to the table. But also, my favorite positional group on this roster, I've been very vocal about this, and this has been my positional group for the last couple of years now. Defensive line. Defensive line is my favorite positional group on this roster. And part of the reason is because, first of all, I love how balanced it is. You have two vets, really solid vets, Brent Urban and Michael Pierce. Pierce was, in my opinion, Baltimore's most underrated player last year. He was that good. Had a breakout. Well, I don't want to say breakout. I think that's the wrong word. But he had a resurgence. Obviously re-signed with Baltimore 2 seasons ago and then got injured in the second game of the year when he was already balling out. Pierce came back, played a full season of incredible football. But then you have your young guys. Justin Madubuike had his breakout season, got rewarded with his $100 million, obviously, or, got rewarded with that big contract. It was close. But then you have other guys as well. Now, my pick for breakout player of the year, I'm going to continue to hammer this point home, Travis Jones. Travis Jones, to me, is an elite two-way player, both as a run stuffer and obviously as a pass rusher. He's someone who's entering his 3rd season and still have no clue how he fell to the 3rd round, but he was one of the standouts in minicamp. We heard a lot of things about that defensive line in minicamp from a lot of people about how good they looked and how incredible they looked. So to me, I think the defensive line is going to be a big part of what Baltimore does this season, was we can talk about their pass rush and say, oh, well, outside linebackers. But I do think that for some people, an underrated aspect of pass rush is you can get it from the interior too. It's not just about your outside linebackers and your edge guys. Generating pressure from the interior is so important. I think that's why Baltimore is so successful as a unit last year, is because Justin Madubuike was getting all this pressure. Michael Pierce was pushing the pocket in, right? All these guys were contributing. I think that has to be the case this season. I think we're going to see that again with other guys stepping up as well. Even Broderick Washington, right? That's a guy who I think could also make more of a name for himself after not really, he wasn't really involved a ton last season compared to what a lot of people thought he would be after signing that. It was a mini extension before the season started, but regardless there. Trenton Simpson also, we learned Trenton Simpson, look, he's going to have a big role in this defense, but he's already getting up to speed, learning a lot, and figuring things out. Him next to Roquan Smith, I think, is going to be huge. And Roquan went up on that podium and talked about how, he just doesn't know how good he can be yet, essentially, is what Roquan said. So I think with Roquan's tutelage, could be a fast-track learning curve for Trenton Simpson, much like we saw for Patrick Queen when Roquan got to Baltimore. Now, in the secondary is a really interesting part of this whole thing for me, because there are so many guys that can contribute, but secondary injuries, particularly at the cornerback position, happen so often. And when you're talking about this Ravens team, that team knows firsthand about specific corner injuries. I'll bring this up every time I get the chance to. 2014 divisional round Patriots game, they would have won that game if they had, they weren't down to their 6th or 7th corner. They signed Rashawn Melvin off the street that game to play. Or it wasn't that game, but they signed him off the street during the season because they had nobody. And everybody in that room was injured. Cornerback depth is really important. Now, we'll talk about Marlon a bit more in the final part of the show, but he's going to be a big part of this team, assuming he can stay healthy for the entire season. Brandon Stephens is somebody who I think has to have a big year after what he was able to do last season. But then you have the younger guys, right? Nate Wiggins being a rookie, TJ Tampa being a rookie. How are some of these other players like Lamar Davis and Pepe Williams going to perform as well? So they have a lot of depth, but a lot of these guys have to prove something, right? Marlon, he's proven that he can be a top corner in this league, right? There's no debate about that. But Brandon Stephens, right? All these guys, I think from Brandon Stephens down, have something to prove. For Brandon Stephens, it's, can you build off of your year last year? For Nate Wiggins and DJ Tampa, how are you going to perform as rookies? For Lamar Davis and Pepe Williams, can you make an impact? It's been a lot of injury-plagued seasons for those guys. Can you stay healthy and make an impact? So Baltimore has a lot. Arthur Millette, too. He's a guy that has not bounced around the league, but I think last year was one of his career years. In Pittsburgh, he had kind of fallen off a little bit, and he replicated his season as well. So a lot of stuff to prove in that room, but a lot of guys impressing in OTAs. and minicamp, both being able to get on that field. So also Justin Tucker, we heard, put on some weight. 3.8 pounds is the whole thing going around. So he's going to be more involved in kickoffs. Who knows? But Justin Tucker's was very in-depth about the whole kickoff rule thing, and I'm excited to see how that plays out too. Coming up to the final part of the show, we'll continue talking about takeaways from mandatory minicamp, including some injuries and more. Stay tuned, a lot to get to on the show. We are back here, our final segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Ostreicher still talking with you here. Haven't gone anywhere. Really appreciate everybody again for being here. If you're an everydayer, thank you so much for being with me each and every single day. If you're new to the channel, welcome in. Hopefully you're enjoying the content. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button, whether you're in video form or audio form. And if you're somewhat new, right, maybe you've checked in for a couple of episodes or you're tuning back in for after a while, appreciate you for being here with us today. Now let's continue the takeaways, continue what we learned. I think for me, a big part of this is injuries. And John Harbaugh saying Marlon Humphrey had some nagging things going on. A big takeaway for the Marlon thing is it's just mysterious. It's just, I don't know, because we know Marlon suffered a bunch of injuries last year. And we talked about this on yesterday's show. We even talked about it with Kaji Ismail on our Thursday show. But it's like, where did this stem from? Was this something that is just lingering from last season, or something got reflared up from last year and, he's just kind of working through it? Or is this a new thing that happened in the offseason and it just has to recover? We don't know. We don't know anything. It's John Harbaugh being vague about it. John Harbaugh, as he usually is pretty vague about the injuries, which is fine. But again, we don't know. So he said that Humphrey should be good to go for training camp, but we're gonna have to figure it out. We're gonna have to see. Right now, I mentioned this on yesterday's show too. My concern level is probably like a 2 to 3, so probably like 2.5 at the end of the day. But if Marlon isn't there for training camp, or he's not full go for training camp, that concern level jumps up in a whole heck of a lot. I'll tell you that. Kyle Hamilton had the loose bodies removed from his elbow. John Harbaugh saying again, should be good to go. So look, big takeaway for me, and this is something we all know, is the healthier Baltimore can be this season, the better shot they have to win the Super Bowl. This is a really talented roster. A lot of young guys have to step up, but they can't afford to lose their stars. And they were pretty good with that last season. The only guys that had to miss the season, go on season-ending IR, was J.K. Dobbins and David Ajabo and Keaton Mitchell. Those were the three guys. Even though Mark Andrews wasn't healthy, he came back. Marlon wasn't healthy, he came back. It was a different type of injury-plagued year for Baltimore, where last year it was a bunch of, this guy's out for 2 weeks, this guy's out for a month, this guy's out for a month and a half, this guy comes back, this guy goes out again. It wasn't season ending. For the last 3 to 4 seasons, we've been talking about how it's just, okay, season ending IR, just all these different players, their season's over. Last year, it was a little different, where they still dealt with a bunch of injuries. It was just different because it wasn't guys going on season ending IR. It was guys going on short-term IR, guys being out for 3 weeks and then coming back. I mean, I'm going on and on and on about that list. But injuries happen in football, right? No team is immune to them. They all happen. The Ravens will go through them this year too. Now, knock on wood, it is, and there's the knock, it's not going to be big, not going to be a lot of injuries. But the way that and I talked about those corner injuries in the second part of the show, can guys like Pepe Williams and Daniel Lumber Davis step up? So that's going to be really important as well. Now, I think moving ahead to training camp, I mean, again, we have a long way to go before that, but this roster could look a little bit different. I'm not talking about they're going to just move everybody, trade everybody, but there is now time. We know that Eric DeCosta used a lot of this offseason time after the draft last year to add a bunch of pieces. Now, that's not going to be what happens this season, in my opinion. I could see them adding 1 or 2 more pieces before training camp starts. But I think what we learned from minicamp, and honestly, if you want to go back to OTAs, is this team trusts a lot of their young talent. And the whole plan here is the Ravens only have about $5 or $6 million in cap space right now. They can make some more. They can use up what they have. But it feels like, you can talk about whatever position you want to. Wide receiver, seems like they trust Rashad Bateman a lot. Tez Walker has been balling out. Tight end wise, you don't need to add anybody. I mean, you could even talk about defensive line, outside linebacker, corner, safety. Safety is the one I would add. I would definitely add to the safety position. But it seems like they have so much trust in a lot of these young guys, they don't feel the need to add as much. in veteran free agency. So it wouldn't shock me if, maybe they bring in a safety or just one or two other guys, but it's not going to be, okay, Jadeveon Clowney and Arthur Millette and Ronald Darby and like move after move after move, kind of like it was. Maybe it is. I don't know. I mean, competition is always good. Upgrading is always good. You should always be looking for ways to improve your team, and Eric DeCosta certainly does that. But when it comes to like adding a wide receiver or trading for a wide receiver, their whole team has been so complimentary of Bateman up there on that podium. And despite some of the miscommunications and frustration we saw from Lamar and Rashad Bateman, Kai just now talked to us about that, there were a lot of good plays too. And it felt like, that's what the Ravens are looking for. On that offensive line, they could have gone out and signed a veteran or drafted a guy in the first round. Well, they signed Josh Jones and they drafted Roger Rosengarten in the second, but, it wasn't a first-round pick investment. It wasn't a huge veteran signing investment. Not that they could do that anyway. Offensive linemen cost a ton in free agency. So that's not how that works, at least for Baltimore right now. But seems like to me, it's just kind of hammered my point home, something I've been making for a while now, about how Baltimore is going to trust the young guys. This is a bit of whether you want to call it a youth movement or replacement plan, this is what Baltimore was going with. They understand Lamar Jackson's contract, right? That is a big deal, but it's not just about Lamar. It's about the other contracts on this roster, like Justin Madubuike, who they just signed. I mean, you pay Derrick Henry $8 million up to $10 million per season, but that's not a big contract. You still got Roquan Smith, Marlon Humphrey, Ronnie Stanley's last year at his deal, even though that was restructured, and a bunch of other players as well. You're not going to be able to go out there and just sign guy after guy after guy. And while you could take a flyer on some reclamation projects again, right? I think for a guy like Clowney, Van Noy, Millette, all these guys where it's like, okay, what's really left in the tank for these guys? Are they really going to contribute? And DeCosta hit on almost every single one. I mean, Rock Ya-Sin, who was their bigger signing of the offseason, especially at corner, was just not the guy for them. So do they sign a guy before training camp starts? I don't know. If I had to guess, I'd probably say no. But if they sign one or two, definitely would not shock me. So training camp starts up. We got a long way to go. We're June 15th right now. Yeah, we got a long way to go before training camp. And then once we hit training camp, it's kind of just smooth sailing till the regular season starts, and then you can kind of figure things out from there. But it's Ravens roster. This is a big year for those second-year guys, third-year guys, fourth-year guys, also the rookies. I mean, last year's rookie class, you got Zay Flowers and Tavius Robinson contributing, which, by the way, Tavius Robinson has apparently looked very good during offseason workouts so far. But I think this rookie class is going to have to contribute, at least for a sheer number of players, a little bit more than they did last year in terms of Baltimore's 2023 rookie class. So minicamp in the books, and we'll be talking about more of that on Monday and also some tomorrow on our bonus episodes. So be sure to stay tuned for all that. That's all I have here today on today's bonus episode of Locked On Ravens. Be sure to subscribe, follow along on YouTube, and follow along in audio form as well. Coming up, we'll be back here tomorrow talking about what Steve Young had to say about Lamar Jackson and the truth that he spoke. So be sure to stay tuned. We got plenty to talk about coming up. We'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On Ravens.